Wow, Shark from Jaws looks a lot better, doesn't it? Well, welcome back to another episode of Jim and Parker's Excellent Podcast.
Excellent!
And today we're coming back to you with the 1975 major blockbuster classic, It's Jaws. Yes. We swear we're not coming to you just because it's the summertime and because it's a major blockbuster, or the first major blockbuster summer movie. There is a little bit of relevancy of why we're talking to you about this today. But with us beginning this conversation, we do want to talk about how this film got started, because everyone would imagine that, you know, one of the masterpieces of the horror suspense genre would just come naturally to the great Steven Spielberg. But that wasn't such the case, now was it, Jim?
No, it wasn't. Now, Jaws was based on the 1974 bestseller by Peter Benchley, the first-time author. And in galley form, it was picked up by producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown, who brought it to Steven Spielberg. And at first, production went well because they were filming on land. However, once they got the shark in the water and the rest of the cast and crew into the water, things went horribly wrong. Originally budgeted at $4 million and about 50 or 60 shooting days, it went to about $20 million and probably triple the shooting schedule because the ocean was a bloody nightmare. The shark never worked. And a lot of it was also because of the ocean currents beating against the shark and its pneumatic tubes. It just created a massive headache every single day. Sometimes Steven wouldn't even get any shots done because the weather was so bad, the shark was so bad. It was production hell. It's become legendary in Hollywood. However, once they got back to the mainland and cut the film together, they had a masterpiece on their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just because of the usual flash, but it's because of very well-defined characters, excellent direction by Steven despite all the problems, and a great score, a great look, overall great feeling. And a lot of that also has to do with the fact that while they were shooting, because the shark would often fail, they had to invent on the spot a way to shoot the shark without having the shark present.
Mm-hmm.
So he would, instead of making a monster film, as he put it, he had to shoot a Hitchcock film.
Yeah.
So for the first half of the film, you never see the shark, or you can maybe catch a tiny, tiny little glimpse, maybe a fin, maybe a little bit of a reflection underwater. But most of the time it's off screen. And you know what? That's actually part of why it works so well, is that it was treated more like a thriller instead of a monster movie, which the sequels unfortunately gave into. But that's like for one of our bogus ramblings perhaps one day. Now, the sequels range from like mild curiosity with Jaws 2 to a major WTF for Jaws 3. And then Jaws 4 is actually, in my opinion, and a lot of others, one of the single worst films ever made. So I probably that will give you some idea of how far the franchise fell. But in the case of Jaws, it's impeccable entertainment and impeccably put together. This is one of the most well put together films of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a lot of heart despite the fact that it is kind of a horror film. There's a lot of, like I said, the characters defined perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And they work well off each other in this film. It gives it a human edge, which the sequels lacked, and a lot of films like this lack.
Yeah, and I think this was the first. Again, this was the second major film that Spielberg directed.
Yes,
correct? Yeah.
Two.
What a home run of a movie for him to direct. As a second film. I'm sure some filmmakers would kill to have this as their second film. And this is where we really start to see the Spielbergness of, his movies come out. I
Hmm.
describe it as, and I'm not the first to describe it as this, but I'm sure it fits the tone just perfectly. It's whimsical. It absolutely just captures that essence of, there could be something very serious going on, but we're just going to float over the issues. He absolutely he captures that in almost no other way that any other director really can. It's something that's just, it's uncatchable. It's uncanny
Yeah.
to anyone besides him, and he really does get it. And especially for a movie that went through production hell, like just like what Jim talked about. This movie had so many issues going on, and this would have been an easy movie for the Hollywood executives to say, "All right, we're going to cut this. It's a sunk cost. Like this was a hell of an idea. It did not pan out. We're going to like maybe take some good ideas from this, try it again later." But somehow this came together and it worked well. And it really goes to resiliency of, cool, we have this original idea and script of what we think this is going to be. That's not going to happen. How do we take what can work from it and make it into something else? And it really, I think it came out the better for it, because I think if this was just like another sort of like, kind of slasher-ish like horror
Yeah.
film, I don't think it would have panned out as well. But this turned into a really suspenseful kind of horror film that works a lot better, in my opinion. That pans to a better, wider audience than horror films in general, like slasher films. Because I think that applies to a very niche group of people
Yeah.
that will absolutely go see them, but it's a much smaller target market. Whereas this was a major blockbuster when it came out.
It
Like,
was.
what were the figures when this came out, Jim?
Well, to begin with, Jaws is actually the first film to be given what we know as a normal release. Back then, it was called a wide release. Normally, at that time, films would start at like the urban centers and work their way into the heartland, or work east and move their way west. In this case, Lou Wasserman, who ran Universal Studios, felt that the overruns were so great that they had to make their money back somehow, because it was just too much of an overrun. So they decided what they would do is they would release it on multiple screens across the nation. At that time, I think it was 400 or 500 screens, which today is more into for an independent release than than a movie of Jaws' nature. But in this case, it made gangbusters. It surpassed The Godfather. It surpassed Gone with the Wind. Domestically at the box office, became number one at the box office for a long time, which was followed by Star Wars and then followed by AT. George and Steven kind of traded off positions as king of the box office for a
They
while.
really owned the 70s and
They
80s,
did.
for being honest about
They
it.
did. They did. And Jaws really started that wide release, and people were so stunned by the success that everybody said, "Get me one of those." And that kind of is what started what we know today as the blockbuster generation, which is what we're living in with the Marvel films. But with Jaws, it also just caught a wave. The audience was ready for it. Like I said, the book was a bestseller even into 1975. And when people saw it, it was such a primal movie, and it was so unlike anything that they had really seen, that people just latched onto it because it was fresh direction. Steven, just the compositions he has in his shots are just absolutely incredible. Like, have the idea, like I said before, they can't show the shark. Fine, we'll show the camera just below the waterline and even lap the lens, so that you think, oh, is the shark there? Is the shark there? Shark everywhere. That led to the
Mhm.
paranoia and the fear that the audience had, especially after the opening scene where we see the girl Chrissy Watkins get devoured. Never see the shark at all,
Mhm.
but just her performance, John Williams's music, and just the fear of what you don't see a foot below you in the natural ocean was just enough to get people under the seats, and it hooked the audience.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. And I think going back to what Jim just said of how this really caught the wave of where cinema was going within the mid 70s, this really hops onto what I kind of like to call the James Bond wave of James Bond, was, especially with Dr. No from Russia with Love, but especially with Goldfinger, those were the first real major blockbusters.
I
Like
agree.
Jaws blew those figures out of the water for sure, but James Bond was the first real blockbuster that we saw in major cinema post World War II. And it absolutely created a whole new genre of film and cinema that we haven't seen, well, that we're still living in for the most part. Hell, even our generation probably is defined by those films entirely.
Indeed.
And we talked about this a bit in our Goldfinger episode. So if you want to, show the love a little bit, you can go watch that one, go into in depth of the late great Sean Connery and his perfect Bond film, in my opinion. But this film really catches it. And again, similarities kind of to those films. James Bond, based off of Sir Ian Fleming's books, Jaws the movie, based off of the best-selling book. And that's very true of a lot of movies in this through the rest of the 70s and even up to this day. Hell, you could look at the Bourne series, the Bourne trilogy, and additional movies that came on based off of a book series,
Yeah.
which is very true of a lot of like major blockbusters if you really think about it. The Tom Clancy movies were the same.
Harry Potter.
Exactly.
The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Or what's the Divergent series with Shailene Woodley, although that wasn't as successful. All based on major book series. So really, this was the catalyst, more or less, along with James Bond, for transforming what we know is major blockbuster cinema.
Right. And adaptations had been around long before. I mean, even since the inception of cinema. But what makes Jaws unique is that this film, the screenplay written by Carl Gottlieb and co-written by Peter Benchley, is actually a vast improvement on the book in almost every regard, because the characters in the book are merely plot functions and not as interesting as the shark, oddly enough. And the shark is not supposed to have a personality in the book. So that just tells you what that was like. But just kind of that idea of man versus nature was appealing. But during production, the script was always in flux. They were writing pages the night before, rewriting things the day of even. And all the cast and all the crew would get together and they would contribute to the script. It wasn't like, oh, beef up my part. A lot of the times the actors would actually say, hey, what would be great for his character? Why not have him say this? Or with me, how about I say this because that would help him? It was a true collaboration between Spielberg and his cast and crew, even to the point where, a lot of great lines actually came on the fly on the set. Like, for example, you're going to need a bigger boat. Not in the script. Roy Scheider came up with that during the take. And of course, you're going to need a bigger boat is one of the most famous lines in movie history. And even the case where the story is so tight, it's very tightly wound. It's very quick paced because in the book, there's a lot of subplots, a lot of unnecessary machinations to get them out onto the boat to begin with or going through the town. In this, it's simple. Shark appears, threatens the town denies it. It keeps attacking, gotta go kill the shark, end of movie. And in this case, too, there's one element of the script that I when I pitched this to Parker, he didn't believe me at first, but there's one element of this movie that bothered me as a kid, but now just I think has aged a little too well. At the beginning of the movie, Amity Island is this summer-based economy, and the shark appears. It's going to harm the tourism. And when I was a kid, I thought nobody in their right mind, after finding out 2 people died from a shark attack in the same week, are going to be concerned with their money, their businesses, getting the tourists to come in, going to the beach, affecting summer. I thought there is no way people would act like this. And, unfortunately, a recent event kind of changed that for me.
I was saying, what recent event was it, Jim? Like, can you put your finger on it? Can you be a little more specific here?
It's almost like we're kind of still living in it. It's kind of.
Yeah, I know we're just drinking some generic beer. Maybe if we had a Corona. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. That I wasn't, and like I said, I was not looking for this when I was watching this. I haven't seen this in many years. And when I watched it, I thought, I'll let Parker elaborate.
I say, when Jim pitched this to me, when we were thinking of our next episode to do, we were talking about a few different like kind of summer blockbusters and everything. And one night, Jim just texts me out of the blue, and he's usually not a very late texter. So I get a text from him like 10 p.m. I'm like, what the heck? What's he doing up? And he says me like, yo, we need to do Jaws. I'm like, okay, because it's a summer blockbuster. He's like, no, that is not the reason. Plays in well, not the reason. And he pitched me how relevant this movie was to COVID and kind of the things in it. And in a text, I will be fully honest, I was like, I kind of see it, but I also don't really see it. But within the first 20 minutes of watching this movie, I went, holy shit, does this match up? It literally matched up. And I paused this movie probably about 3 times
You
as we
did.
were rewatching it to be like, holy shit, does this match up? I couldn't believe it. Like, just a few lines of the dialogue that really, again, you can say these things in 2020, 2021 in America with COVID. They kind of match up. One, it's nothing to be worried about. We don't want to cause a panic. the one that I laugh at, 24 hours, that's like 3 weeks. You should try 12 months, lady. It's awful.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the best, well, Jim, you have, what's your favorite line?
What the second kill of the movie, this little boy is killed while swimming on a raft near the beach. And literally the next cut, it cuts to a town council. They're trying to figure out what to do, or rather how to save their skins. And one of the ladies says, "We don't even know that there's a shark out there." I was like, "Lady, you were just sitting on, you saw this boy get dragged under the water. Like, what are you talking about? Like, are you that brain dead?" And then, of course, yeah, we're not trying to force this. It's just when I watched, I thought, boy, this aged really well.
It just matches. It's like,
Yeah.
it is just like the X and Y's are lining up perfectly. And my favorite line is when Richard Dreyfuss, it's his like first scene in the movie. He arrives on as this marine biologist. He's trying to talk with the chief of police and trying to help. The chief is asking him to help out. And so he goes to this boat from across the harbor. He's yelling, "Hey guys, you're over capacity. You can't do that." And they're literally laughing him off and just shooing him away. And just a great little moment. Richard Dreyfuss turns away, and as he does, he just gives his little heckle away. They're all gonna die. It's just such a great line. I'm like, oh my god, that's like Missouri right now. Like, it's how bad some of it is in the country.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's just like I said, when I was a kid, I thought nobody acts this way, and then now that I'm an adult, I think,
yeah,
they were pretty close to the mark.
It goes to show you, never underestimate the stupidity of stupid people.
Yeah, especially the town of Amity Island. So,
yeah.
But that's just one of the things that, again, like a lot of films from the 70s don't tend to age well, but in this case, the rest of Jaws aged very, very well indeed. Oh, yeah. But this was just an element that I thought there's no way this is realistic. And well, that's just one thing that Jaws just goes to show the script was more acute than they thought, just a little more forward thinking. But
yeah, absolutely.
And there's even the second half of the film, which deals with the hunting of the shark out in the open ocean, where the crew encountered all the problems. It's just such a fun kind of almost seafaring quality, because in the book it's very kind of slow, very deliberately paced, I'd say. Whereas this one, it starts off a little bit, you're waiting for the shark, but once the shark appears, we're back to the very quick pace. And with that being
it's kind of
said,
like a boy's adventure.
Yeah, and with that being said, there was an element about those scenes that you thought was rather fascinating, and that will lead into the next segue. One of the chief reasons of the success of this movie is John Williams' incredible score.
It really is. And so sorry, our dog's down there. She's supporting us. And so when I originally watched this movie, again, Steven Spielberg is very whimsical, but I think the element that helps out so much with that is John Williams' score, because he kind of just edges Spielberg on. He's like, I see what you're going for. Let me just like throw a little more kindling onto the fire there.
Yeah.
And there are many moments in the second half of the film where they're hunting the shark, and some very tense moments and everything, with some high editing, high pitch, intense moments. And then after like the moment's over, it's like, oh, we're on a merry sea voyage, my laddies. It's like, what? All right, we're just kind of like hanging out now on the boat. It kind of goes back and forth through that through the second half of the film. And on paper, that sounds like it works super well, but in reality, it worked really, really well. And only Spielberg could pull this off. Like, he's he's pretty much the actor that knows how to put whimsicality into a movie and make it work. He really does. But then also, he knows how to bring in those really heavy moments, which kind of in the second half, there is an arguably, in my opinion, it's probably one of the top 10 monologues of all time.
Yeah, it is.
And Mr. Crowley, would you like to elaborate us a little bit more on that? Because you would
Well,
do it better justice than I would.
I don't know about that, but I'll try. So the scene in question is after they see the shark for the first time. It's at night. They're having dinner. They're having a couple of belts, and
Having a fun old time with
they're
the boys.
comparing scars. And eventually, it's revealed that Quint got a tattoo removed of the USS Indianapolis, and he launches into this monologue about the terror of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis, which you should look up yourself. It's one of the most harrowing stories of World War II, and it's not very well known, even with the inclusion in this film. It's the story of this fear of being in the water surrounded by sharks picking off men left and right, which is part of the story, and it really did happen, and it lent a gravitas to this movie and brought such a dimensionality to Quint, who had before it kind of played like the old salty sea dog, cracking limericks, swearing like a sailor, obviously. But this was the scene that really kind of brought the movie together in terms of the three leads, because Shaw is a great actor, and he realized not to play it over the top, and he delivers it very subtly, just very dry almost. But it starts off, he's even smiling. He says, "Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into our side, chief." And then he just continues this very kind of quiet kind of voice, just telling the story. And Scheider and Dreyfuss are simply listening. They're not even acting. They're just listening to Shaw tell the story. And this could have so easily been overblown or very easily come off wrong, because Spielberg perfectly directs the scene. He doesn't bring the camera in too close. Williams' score is very soft, very kind of eerie. It lends to the eeriness of the story. And it's just a scene where Quint has a clear motivation for wanting to kill the sharks, like why he is who he is. And again, like Parker said, it does come off the heels of Boys on the Boat having a couple belts, just laughing, and then they go after the monologue is over, they sing a little sea shanty. It is the best scene in the movie because, like I said, this is a very odd concept to make into a movie. It's a primal one. It's very simple, but that was just the effort of Spielberg and everybody involved, just wanting to bring humanity to these characters. And this just really knocked it out of the park. If you can find it on YouTube, or if you're going to watch Jaws, it's really one of the best. It is the best scene of the film.
Mm-hmm. And if you're a film student, and you have to give a monologue at some point or in a class or in the future, I really struggle because monologues, they're common enough that you can find them.
Yeah.
But finding a really good one, that it's really tough. I did, classic. Because I took an acting class in college. I did John Belushi's speech from Animal House, being the frat boy that I was.
Perfect.
Exactly. Perfect. I literally ran out of the theater, came back. I'm sorry, Megan, if you're seeing this. It's probably not her name. I don't remember. No offense. But this is a great kind of monologue for that, it's easy going enough that you can remember the lines, but when you deliver it right, which I think this is all about the delivery, and it is delivered perfectly. It carries that weight with it. It really was. And even watching this is my third time watching it. And so again, I think this goes back into the rewatchability factor, because I think in any other movie, if you set it up this way, it would have been very easy to let the second half kind of meander along a little bit, because it's about the hunt. And sometimes the hunt is long, it's boring, there's kind of some monotony to it. This centers the hunt. It brings the film back to what you're looking for with it, and really grasps the viewership again of oh my God, there's some really heavy crap going on.
And that's a testament again to Steven Spielberg and his just natural knack for pulling great performances out of his actors from all types. And it's not just this scene. There's lots of great little moments of humor sprinkled in throughout the movie. There's a lot of great lines. I mean, Carl Gottlieb was a comedy writer in the 70s, and so he really brought all of his talents to bear. But there was another really sweet moment early on in the film when the chief has been called out for preventing a second attack. And that's a really raw scene from the actress Lee Fierro
Mhm.
just chewing out Roy Scheider. But it's followed up by, I think, what we would call piece of Spielbergian whimsy, which he's sitting at the table, kind of thinking like this, and his little 5-year-old boy is doing the same thing, and he realizes, and he starts changing his hands, and the little boy exactly,
Mhm.
and it's so sweet. It's one of those moments where it didn't need to be there, like in terms of the script or even the original book, but it just brought so much to the movie. It made things more relatable, I think.
Yeah.
Just those little things.
And I think it's really that's the essence of the Spielberginess of all his films is, he realizes that yes, movies and films are an escape from reality, but
Yeah.
also at a certain point there needs to be a moment where they attach onto what's going on in our lives. And he realizes how to build out these kind of grand level adventures and everything going on,
Yeah.
but how to add those human moments into it that like you could be having a terrible day. You come home from work or something,
Yeah.
nothing's going right, and you sit like, just that scene, you sit at the dinner table with your wife, your husband, or kids, or whatever,
Yeah.
and there's some like little thing that goes on that just brings some joy into your life, and he captures that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to sum it up better than that, because he really just knows how to, in whatever movie he's ever done, he knows how to latch onto that.
Yeah.
Hell, even in Schindler's List, which is it's a really dark and heavy film.
One of my favorite films.
Yeah,
It really is.
but he does know how to even find little moments in there.
Hmm.
Which even for that, like that's a really tough film to find
Yeah.
joyful moments in. But,
Yeah.
and again,
It's not quite on the same plane as Jaws, because one
Right.
is clearly not the other. But that's just even at age. Stephen was 27 when he made this.
He was
movie.
our age.
He was our
honestly,
age,
which is crazy. Like,
And
think about directing the
Yeah.
best blockbuster ever.
he
at
has
our
he has
age.
top
Which
he
is
has
insane.
top flight actors. They weren't superstars by any means, but he had top flight actors. He had some of the best producers. He had one of the best composers at his disposal, and he goes through absolute hell to make this movie better in every single way, and he succeeds. It's just that's just a dedication that a lot of directors still have that, but Steven still has that knack for just pulling all the right things
Mhm.
out of the material, as disjointed and as disorganized and as broken as a plastic shark. The shark in some shots doesn't look quite real, but that was, you could chalk that up to the fact that it was breaking all the time, and that the technology, they just didn't have time to perfect it. According to the special effects supervisor Robert Matty, who did the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, a very underrated Disney movie, you should check it out. He said that if he had had at least 2 or 3 more months before cameras rolled, he probably would have perfected the shark, but it was rushed because it was a bestseller. They didn't want to lose the audience's interest, so they rushed into production. But by the very, very end of production, they got the shark to move just enough that it fulfilled its role. And compared to the sequels, it's a great shark.
Honestly, compared to a lot of movies these days with CGI, it looks a
Yeah.
hell of a lot better.
Yeah.
No honesty, there
Yeah.
are some CGI movies that come out these days that they just look bad. It looks fake.
Yeah.
There's at least an element of realism to this,
Yeah.
and also, how many people in real life have seen a shark?
Very few.
Yeah, so they're probably gonna call a bluff on it, where like the one scuba diver who's seen a shark live is like, oh, that skin looks
Yeah.
fake as hell. To everyone else, though, like, could look real, but if it's computer generated and it looks computer generated, that's not gonna play out.
And you hit on something there. There is a realism to it, because they did shoot in the Atlantic Ocean about a couple miles off of Martha's Vineyard, where they shot for the scenes for Amity Island. The problem was the water, obviously the ocean has a lot of currents, a lot of riptides, and a lot of things that just would beat the shark. It would ruin all the pneumatics that were in it. They would use compressed air to move the mouth and all that stuff. And it was just hard because all the boats would be pulling away. It was just a nightmare. But just again, through adversity comes this classic, and just never, Spielberg and all the cast and crew never giving up. Even the actors who were lying around a lot waiting for things to shoot were still giving it their all. And I think that just boils down to the fact that this movie is very easy to connect with. You know, you can watch it endlessly. It's endlessly rewatchable.
Oh yeah.
And there is this escapism, like with John Williams providing that music when chasing the shark. It's very light, it's very seafaring. It's a fun movie with just I can't really find fault with this film. I really don't. Is it one of my favorites like it was when I was a kid? No. But when I was a kid, this was my favorite movie. But I've discovered others. But that doesn't take away from this movie at all.
Yeah. And Jim, what was Spielberg's reward for producing and directing such a great film?
Criticism that he got lucky. Now, critics praised him in their reviews. He got a couple of award nominations, but when it came to the Academy Awards, he got snubbed for a Best Director nomination. Now, Jaws did get 4 nominations, one for Best Picture. It did not win, but it won for Best Sound, Best Score for John Williams, and Best Editing for Verna Fields, who did some really incredible editing. If you talk about like one of the best edited films of all time, Jaws is certainly on the list. She was brilliant, and she did a lot of natural cutting, a lot of things that created like a frenzy. So very well deserved Oscar for all those areas. But when Spielberg asked why he didn't quite get that Best Director nomination, a lot of people in the industry, especially a lot of older veterans, said, "You got lucky. You don't deserve the praise. You got lucky. You had Verna Fields, you had John Williams to help you. You know, you didn't deserve it." So come the next film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they all sat back and said, "Oh, maybe this kid really is that talented. Maybe he is a genius," and thus kind of locked Steven into the career that we still see today.
Mm-hmm.
But I just thought, that's just cruel for me. It's just like, you go through all this hell, and he's apparently still suffers nightmares thinking about the 50th day on the water. It's just like, that's just not right.
Yeah.
And he should have gotten a Best Director nomination. He probably should have won that year. That year the big one was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He would have been up against Milos Forman. Very, very tough to call.
Very tough. Yeah.
But in terms of like the freshness that he brought with his direction, like I said, having the camera, instead of seeing the shark kind of riding the surface like this, or kind of coming out of the surface as originally intended, he had his director of photography, Bill Butler, put the camera just right down against the surface, and the water would even lap the lens to kind of imply like, oh, is the shark there? Who knows? Mm-hmm. It just that again, his ability to weave that into his direction, that fear and that paranoia into his eye, was just spectacular.
Yeah. And it would take until Saving Private Ryan, which was what, 1998?
Well, he did win for Schindler's.
That's true. He did win for Schindler's. That's true. Yes, actually, take that back. Yes.
Yeah, but it did take him a very long time.
Right, because Schindler's List was late 80s?
93.
90. Wow, and what was Saving Private Ryan?
98.
98, yeah. So Jaws 1975. It took him almost 2 decades to get an Oscar. Not to say that was the only good movie Spielberg put out, because it's Steven freaking Spielberg.
Yeah.
The man, along with George Lucas, they own the 70s and the 80s. They literally created probably what is modern cinema. What like what Christopher Nolan, what J.J. Abrams, what everybody else like followed after, they laid the groundwork for them to go do it.
Yeah.
No one else like laid that groundwork for them. Spielberg and Lucas had to create that industry of movies, which really is, we are living in the byproduct of it.
Yeah.
I don't know when the day he'll be inducted into the Kennedy Center for Honors, the Hollywood, Hall of Fame or whatever. I'm not sure if the Star Walk is. I don't think it's the same as that. I don't know any of this stuff.
He got his star a long time ago.
I'm sure he did. But like the day that he gets all of those big honors that he's due, like they are gonna be worth it 3 times over.
Oh yeah.
Like absolutely.
Yeah, and even even coming back to that idea of the wide release, a lot of people point fingers at Steven and George for quote unquote ruining Hollywood, like ending the new Hollywood era of the 70s, taking us into the blockbuster genre. And it's just that's not really a fair criticism because a lot of that just came from the fact that Jaws was so successful. The studios wanted more,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the filmmakers of the time just didn't fit
Yeah.
with that kind of concept. Like Stephen and George were just right. They were young enough that they were kind of marinating in this culture that we're going through today, kind of the comic book, adventure, blockbuster culture. And it's just one of those things that Jaws kind of is used as a signpost in film school of like the death of cinema. I once had to write a paper saying that it was to appease my rather curt and very anti-Hollywood teacher, which it pained me to do, but I did it, but because I just had to pass that class. And but Jaws, when you really come down to it, is a great film, endlessly rewatchable, very, very few flaws. If there are flaws, they're easily ignored. You can very easily skip.
There's some minor,
Yeah.
honestly. Like again, like even going back to like I think the biggest flaw is the animatronics and the mechanical failings of the shark and like, oh, it doesn't look real. Again, I would rather watch that than some crappy CGI movie. Like I'd rather watch that than Pixels because Pixels looks like shit. Yeah. Compared to this, that at least looks semi-realistic.
Or even the Meg. Like apparently, when they were making the movie called The Meg, they said we're going to try to make the second best shark movie of all time. So even they knew that they were kind of moseying in on Jaws's territory, but they at least admitted they said we're never going to beat it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, the shark compared to the sequels, this shark looks like the best effects you'll ever see compared to the sequels, which are just some of the worst effects you'll ever see. I kind of pray you don't watch them, but we may for Bogus Ramblings. We'll see.
I say if you want to get me just absolutely housed one night, sure, yeah. But no, like again, this movie is so much fun to watch. This is my third time rewatching it. The first time I watched it was with this guy. He got me good in the
I did
with the boat scene where there's a certain
well one of the scenes is Hooper and Brody are out searching for the shark, and they come upon a wrecked boat of a local fisherman, and Hooper goes down and he finds this big hole in the bottom of the boat, and there's a tooth in it of a great white. While he's looking at it, the dead head of this fisherman comes through the hole in the boat, and he's missing an eye. It's very, very gruesome.
Yeah.
Parker jumped a little. He was just like, oh,
let's just say my head almost hit the ceiling on that one. So yeah, and he paused the movie too, and he gave me a second. I still wasn't expecting it. I
was trying to give you a little credit. You don't have to tell him how far you jumped.
I'm just trying to tell him how much of a pussycat I am. I mean, come on now.
Well, I just thought I'd try to give you a little credit.
Oh, I appreciate you. But no, like this movie is endlessly rewatchable. This is one of the movies we'll show to our kids one day because it's just such it's that good of a movie, which again is so crazy because it came out of such production hell. The only thing in my mind off the top of my head that it comes close to is The Godfather. The Godfather, for as amazing that film is, it's one of my personal favorites, as I'm sure it's like any movie buff personal favorites. That movie went through production hell to get done.
Yeah.
This is pretty much on the same level. But it's endlessly rewatchable. It is worthy of all the praise. There is a reason this is like in the top 100 lists of any major film list out there.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic. And we wish more people would see it. It's a perfect like stay-at-home movie. Even like your little kids, they're gonna be freaked out a little bit. Sure. Should they not go in the water? No. The chance of you getting eaten by a shark, you got a better chance of getting stung by a jellyfish than getting eaten by a shark. Like, let's be just straight up honest.
But lucky for you, this movie is rated PG. PG. Sorry.
Yeah.
I almost said PG-13.
I said PG-13 didn't exist for that. Which Spielberg was also
he was
influential
for that.
That wasn't for Jaws though. That was for Gremlins.
Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
I say. So Spielberg again, despite all of the movies he's done, he gave you the PG-13 rating.
Yeah.
You're welcome, teenagers who couldn't see an R movie yet. But anyway, so that's our time today, though. We appreciate you watching and hanging out with us today. I'm Parker Glazner.
I'm Jim Crowley.
And we'll see you next time on Jim and Parker's Excellent Podcast.
Party on, dudes.